I'm very honored to be able to introduce Jane Jacobs. If you don't already know her, she's a really fierce litigator in employment and labor issues. She deals with employment and discrimination and harassment, wage and hour issues, ERISA claims, and enforcement of non-compete and confidentiality agreements. She's also highly involved with dealing with collective bargaining and labor union issues. Not only that, she runs a very active practice in New York with her other attorneys and partners, but she's also very involved in INBLF. She, as most of you know, she's ran the INBLF New York Black Tie event last year. She was chapter president of the New York chapter last year, and she is also my co-chair for this webinar series. So I'd like to welcome you to an amazing presentation by Jane Jacobs. Jane, I'm gonna let you take the stage now.
Okay, and let me return the favor briefly because I am Marcine's #1 fan. Marcine, who will be chiming in today, is the head of the Seed Law Group in the Silicon Valley. She's the president of the Silicon Valley chapter. She's on the INBLF board and executive committee. She's got a long list of honors and positions. She is notably the director of the Board of Governors of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and thrilled to be doing this with her and Larry. Please do chime in with questions as we're going along. I do enough of these to know that an hour of me speaking is boring. So please do chime in, but when you're not speaking, please mute. What I'm going to try to do today is give a roadmap generally applicable to the United States. There is some applicability internationally, but frankly, we're all in very different situations. If you're in Oregon, you're facing a very different reopening if you ever closed than we are here in New York. And the fact that I am in New York City colors what I'm saying because we have tried to be strict with greater or lesser degrees of success. So I'm trying to talk to you all about things that are applicable in New York, applicable in any hard-hit place, but maybe less so in some states. The first thing I think that you have to do is sit down and come up with a plan of how to bring people back to work. And I'm talking about literally a written plan. In fact, in New York, you're required to have a written plan. There's a template on the New York website. All employers are required to do this. It is whatever is in your plan, the litigator in me is going to urge you to stick to it because you've just committed to writing what you think you need to be doing. And if you're not doing it, you know, I mean, I will happily represent you, but would rather not be doing that in that situation. You're going to be thinking about bringing employees back in stages. You've got to decide who comes back and when. And the first thing, of course, is you're going to have to see where your local and state government, when they tell you you can bring people back, but even when they come back, do you bring everyone back at the same time? I don't think so. I think you bring people in little by little. And you have to make some hard decisions here. Who comes back first? And you really want to make well-documented business decisions about this. Who's been able to work from home? That person can wait a little longer. What positions are you bringing back first? What have you needed in the office most? And really sit down and thoughtfully go through that and decide who needs to be back immediately, who can be in a second wave, who can be in a third wave. You have to think about, well, you know, who do we need to staff, but how do we do this so that we can socially distance? In our office, for example, we have secretarial stations that are 6 feet apart, but there are people walking in front of them. So, you know, talk a little bit about how we are plan to keep those people safe, but also as long as we can do it, we're going to bring back one person, but not the person next to them on the same day, so that there's also more lateral separation than even we're required to do. You're going to have to make decisions that accommodate your employees. We have a lot of problems these days here in New York. Schools closed, camps are mostly haven't decided yet whether they're opening, but parents' summer activities are simply not that they've been disrupted. People don't have childcare. Someone needs to care for their kids. Other people, they have elderly parents. Everyone's got a story, and everyone has figured out, for the most part, that they can work from home if they're professionals. I mean, we're all sitting here in front of an array of technology that would make NASA blush. And most of us are able to do most of our work. And so if you're going to insist that people come back, think about why you're doing that. At least in the short run, you probably don't need everyone back right away. So think about who you have to bring back, when you have to bring them back, and whether they're going to just come back and stay back. You may have, and this is what I'm considering for our firm, an A team and a B team. And the A team will work maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday. The B team will work the other days, or maybe, we'll mix it up a little further than that. That's going to depend on who, how we can physically distance people. We're also thinking about people who have to commute. Do we really need to bring back that secretary who comes in on 3 buses and a train? Does she really have to be back, or can she work from home? And you've already made the investments that you may have made the investments that you need to keep people working at home. We bought a lot of Chromebooks for, our staff so that they can keep working. We figured out how to redirect phones. So if people don't have to be back right away, or if they don't have to be back every day, seriously think about doing it that way. This is not going away anytime in the next month or two.
So Jane, what kind of considerations might I have with people that are, may have compromised health, or
Absolutely.
age is, over 60 years old, but they're really good workers, but you're worried about them, and maybe they're worried about their own health and safety as well.
So the next thing I was just about to go to says, what about employees with disabilities? So, if an employee, let's assume someone has a disability. I'm not going to say whether anything you just mentioned is, but let's say someone has a disability. They ask you to accommodate them. You have an obligation to do that under any circumstances and at any time. It used to be the case that when people said, I want to work from home, you had a pretty good argument that that was not a reasonable accommodation, that it was an undue burden. That defense has sort of gone out the window these days. If your employee was working from home well enough, until now, it's going to be hard to convince anyone that you couldn't let them continue to work from home. So if someone's got a disability, absolutely. The harder questions, I think, are going to be on people who don't have disabilities, and before I leave that, you have the right to go to someone who has a disability, maybe somebody who has asthma, maybe somebody who has autoimmune diseases that they have, and say, can you come back to work? Let's start this interactive process. You don't have to wait for them to come to you. All right. Now, age is not one of those, by the way, but if you've got employees with known disabilities, you can start that conversation with them, and you should. Harder questions, I think, are the ones where people don't have a legal right necessarily to an accommodation, but have, damn good arguments, like people without childcare, people with the elderly parent. You're going to be making subjective decisions about them. And when you get into subjective decisions, that's when Chuck and I get very busy. Chuck represents plaintiffs. It is, in any case where you're saying, I want to cut this person a break, you're pretty much saying, I also have to cut the other person a break, even if you don't think their story is as compelling, unless you can come up with a good business reason. Just to give you an example, let's say you have an associate who's been working very well from home, and you want to accommodate them, but you also have a clerical employee who really can't do that much from home. They need to be there, they need to file, they need to touch paper. That's a legitimate business reason for treating them differently. All right, but you may also have, well, I don't trust this person to work as much. When I try to call them, it was hit or miss whether they'd pick up the phone. You really need to have legitimate business reasons. You need to be able to articulate why you're distinguishing between employees. What's cool about this? I can talk with my hands, and you guys have no idea that this is. All right. So start the interactive process with your disabled employees, your non-disabled employees. Do what you can, but try to be consistent across the board. All right, we talked about, deciding who's going to come back and when. A team and B team. Also think about staggered start times. Not everyone, in fact, everyone should not be coming in at rush hour. You don't want people, there's no reason for people to be crowded into trains. Let people start at 11 and go home at 7 or whatever, let them come in at 6 and leave at 3. There's a great deal to be said for people commuting on off hours. And so that's something you should absolutely consider. Another thing is that your building is probably, if you're in a building with elevators, they're probably going to let only a limited number of people into the elevator at any one time. In our building, there are always elevators out, and you could sit in the lobby for 20 minutes waiting to come upstairs. So everyone's better off if you stagger those work times. But most of all, if you can leave people home for at least the short term, do that. And I'll tell you that we had an all-hands Zoom call this week with our staff, and people are raring to get back, genuinely want to get out of the house and get back to work to a degree that actually floored me. But I also think that after a week, that thrill's going to be gone. And they're going to be commuting with their masks and their gloves in the middle of the summer. They're not going to want to stay in the office. So think about how much you can let people stay home until more of this has passed. All right, so once you decide who's coming back and when, you've got a written plan, you've thought about how that's going to work, you have to keep the workplace safe. And it's not just for your employees, it's for your vendors, for your visitors, for tenants that you may have in your space, for the Xerox repair person. I mean, you need to keep the space safe for everyone. One of your employees gets sick, arguably it's a workers' comp claim, which is less dangerous to an employer, but it may not be. There's some question about that. And clearly your visitors, your vendors, your tenants are not a workers' comp claim. So you want to take every step that you can reasonably take to keep everyone safe. So what kinds of things are you looking at? First question people ask is, can we test people who are coming back to work or coming in the door? Now, let's be clear, there are two different kinds of tests. There are viral tests that test for current coronavirus in the person, active coronavirus, and then there are antibody tests, which indicate that the person had it in the past. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has said that a viral test is permissible because COVID is an active danger to other employees. So you can test someone to make sure that they are not sick and coming in the office and spreading it. What you probably can't do, there's no writing on this, but I don't see it's necessarily follows that you cannot do an antibody test. An antibody test tests again for prior infection. You're well, if you've got antibodies, you've recovered. And so that doesn't give you any useful information. It doesn't help you keep other people safe. So you can require your employees to take a viral test. That's the nasal swab lobotomy test. Those are not instant read. It takes a day or two to get results. So if you're thinking about doing that, I strongly suggest you have employees do it before they come back to work, a few days before. I don't think you're required to do it. But if you do, you're paying for the test and for the time. Okay, so if it takes someone 3 hours to go and get one of these tests, that's on your clock. All right, so you test people or you don't test people. If you do test, you test everyone. You can't say, well, you're over 60 and you're always sick and you're a big faker, so we're just going to selectively decide who we're going to test. You test everyone or no one. Other things you can do. When someone gets to work, take their temperature. We've just ordered a infrared digital thermometer. There are questions about whether these are accurate, but they're no touch. And it can be done by the person themselves, showing the receptionist their readout. And what you're looking for is whether someone is at 100.4 or higher. You should make note of the fact that you took someone's temperature that day and that it was under or over 100.4. but because of privacy reasons, do not record the temperature every day. Just record the fact that it was taken. So it's not something you should not be saying it was 96.3. It was, well, I guess if it was 96.3, they wouldn't be there. But you know, it was 98.3. Don't write that down. Just yes or no. There are questions you're permitted to ask, and the questions are, everyone has the same 6 questions. I think 2 of them are inane. The first one I think is not usable is, did you take public transportation to get to work? In New York City, no one would be back to work. I don't know, you know, that's just strikes me as idiotic. I think what they're trying to get to is, were you on a plane recently? But you know, if you've taken the New York City subway to get to work, you know, the plane is not what you're worried about. That's one. Have you been in quarantine is another. Have you been strict about not leaving your house for at least 2 weeks? I think that's probably unrealistic as well, because everyone I know has gone to the grocery store, has gone out for walks or runs or whatever. I don't know that that's a realistic question either. But the questions that I think that you can and should be asking: do you have symptoms? Do you have a fever? Do you have chills? Do you have aches and pains? Have you lost your sense of smell and taste? Do you have a cough? Do you feel like you have glass in your chest or an anvil on your chest? These are the questions that these are the symptoms that have been identified for COVID, and you can ask that. And what we intend to do in my office is have everyone take their temperature, show it to the receptionist, who will note whether it's higher or lower than 100.4, and we're going to ask them 4 of those 6 questions. Do you have the symptoms? Do you, there's 2 more. Have you been exposed to someone who has the symptoms? Have you had a positive COVID test, viral test, without a negative test? And have you had contact with anyone who's had a positive test in the last 14 days? So you're going to get to the office if you work for us in the morning, and you're going to have your temperature, you're going to take your temperature, and you're going to answer those 4 questions. And someone will make a note of the fact that they've done that. And then you can come in the door. Now, you know, we don't have hundreds of employees, but for, you know, there are a lot of places where people do. And if it's taking 20 minutes to get through the line and get your temperature taken and to answer these questions, that's time on the clock. And so if you have hourly employees, you should be paying for that time. We're going to be talking about litigation threats at the end of this. That to me is a big one. Before COVID, you used to see this with bag checks. People who were leaving Amazon were online for 20 minutes waiting for someone to look in their purses. You know, and that was a multi-million-dollar case because there were so many of them and so much time. So this is the same thing. Okay, if the person doesn't pass the questions or the temperature, send them home. Immediately send them home. The same if someone is sick, actually sick, they get to the office, they develop a fever, or they are exposed and they tell you that. Send them home. First thing you have to do is get them out of the office. Put them in a car service, whatever you're going to do, get them home. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about what you do if, you know, what the steps you need to take. But let me try to do this in a little different order. Still, you know, going back to, you ask people to come back. A tough question I see, as tough as the child care versus the sick parent, are people who are too scared to come back. They don't want to get on public transportation. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. They don't have a disability. They don't have any diagnosis. They just don't want to come back. What do you do there? And I think, as with the disability, you try to accommodate, knowing that if you accommodate this person, anyone in a similar situation will also have to be accommodated. So be very careful and thoughtful about how you make those decisions. And again, you know, things like commuting in off hours and working every other day, things like that, I think will go a long way toward making them feel better. But at the end of the day, if someone says, I'm not coming in, there's a real question with a lot of your employees about whether they should be able to continue working from home. All right, so you've called employees back. How do you keep your environment safe? And again, this is important not just for your employees, but for anyone who enters your premises. My first suggestion to you is to clean ostentatiously. We had someone come in and disinfect the office a few weeks ago. No one had been in there for 6 weeks, so it was utterly unnecessary, but we wanted everyone to know we were doing that. If your space is large enough, establish one-way hallways so that employees aren't crossing each other's paths. As early as you can, procure as much personal protective equipment as you possibly can, because you're going to need more of it than you can imagine. And I'm talking about masks, I'm talking about gloves, I'm talking about disinfectant wipes and sprays, which aren't, strictly speaking, PPE, but you're going to need them. They're going to disappear. These things are hard to find and they're expensive. So order way more of it than you think, and order it now because it's hard to get. Order your thermometer also. Order it and make sure that you've gotten a thermometer that's reliable. Establish restroom policies, one person at a time. Order one of those tissue paper seat liners. I mean, part of this is making people feel okay about coming back to work. But part of it is also, again, you want to show that you've taken every step you can possibly take to keep the workplace safe. Think about your kitchens, or if you have a lunch break area, how many people, if any, are you going to allow in there? Now, in my office, if you cut off that coffee machine, it would get ugly. But we have a very small kitchen. So the policy is one person at a time, and you have to wear gloves so that whatever touch surfaces you touch aren't infected. And we're asking people to take a wipe down whatever they've used. We are telling them that they have to put their coffee cups and whatever in the dishwasher. No one will do it for them. Think about whether or not you're going to allow employees to put food in the refrigerator. I think we are going to do that, but we are going to also say, don't put anything in there you're not prepared to lose, because if someone gets sick, it's all going in the garbage, and it's all going in the garbage every Friday. So where we used to have 85 bottles of salad dressing, don't do that again. All right. There won't be a community mustard thing. Just bring in what you need for that day and take it home with you. We used to have people who would bring in snacks and leave it for everyone, or leftover pizza. There was always something in the kitchen every day. No longer. Just not allowed. Can't do it. A big issue for us, and I think the biggest reason to go back to work, is in-person meetings. We are doing everything we can to eliminate them. As we can see right here, we can Zoom. It's not ideal, but it can be done. And so one of the things we're doing is we are upgrading some of our technology in the conference rooms, so to make sure that it's easier to Zoom and have good quality conference call equipment. We are, to the extent that people do insist on having in-person meetings, we are limiting the number of people that can be in any conference room to about half of what it used to be. We are telling people that if you're hosting a conference or a meeting that has to happen, first of all, everyone needs to be wearing masks that we will provide if you don't have them. And you have to clean up the area afterward. Take wipes, again, wipes for everything. You have to sanitize the tabletops, chair arms, and things like that. We're requiring people to wear masks in every common area. Now, if I'm in my office and I close the door, I can take the mask off and yay, I can breathe. And it's not entirely fair that people without offices have to wear them all day, but there's really no help for it. We've ordered plexiglass barriers. Again, we were talking before about, side to side we're okay, but from the front of the secretary's desk to the walkway, it's right there. They're right, there's no 6 feet. So we ordered things, they look like what the banks have, that will protect the front of the secretary's desk.
Right.
Sorry?
No, that's a great idea.
And there's 1,000 of them out there at Huge differences in cost. Shop around some, but do it now because it's not going to be around. Okay, no desk sharing. Now, in our office, that only means the receptionist because that lunch times, break times. But you know what? We figured out through all this that we can send calls to another phone number. So when the receptionist needs a break, no one's going to sit there. We're going to close the front door. People can ring the doorbell, and another secretary will answer the phone because we don't want to have to disinfect that desk every time someone has to go to the restroom. I ordered boxes of popsicle sticks. I mean, I was trying to think about things like the copier or the occasion, the once a month fax that we send. If you don't want to use gloves, just poke at the machine with a popsicle stick. It's cheaper than the gloves. So we've ordered those. Okay. You have to go through the office, try to imagine everything that people do there. And I'm going to strongly urge you to not be the only one who does that because our staffs do things that we can't imagine. Talk to them about it, see what they need and what would make them feel safe. Because again, some of this is just for the visual. Some of it is just to make people feel better. All right, we talked about upgrading the conference rooms, also the tech from office to office. I mean, we've always used Skype and about half the people don't really like it, but we Skype from office to office. Everyone's going to have it. People are raving about Teams. If I never see that commercial again with the lady who innovates, I will be very happy, but people say it's a great product. You don't need to get up and go into the next office. You just don't need to do it. So anything you can do to avoid that, and you know what? The person in the next office may or may not even be there that day. So come up with some instant messaging program so that you can communicate with each other. All right. This really is a rabbit hole, trying to anticipate everything that's going to happen. The other night, it occurred to me, we always have a pencil cup in the copier room so that if someone has to jot a note down, I don't want people sharing pens anymore. That's going to the garbage. There are 1,000 things like that. Try to think of what it is you need and what you do in the course of a day, and you'll come up with an awful lot of stuff. All right, despite your best efforts. Yes, Kirsten. I can't hear you, muted.
How are you
Okay.
going to enforce the hand washing protocols? Especially if
Okay.
you have one bathroom, you've got all these people in there, washing their hands 6 times a day.
So, one of the things that I was going to mention a little later is you need to train your supervisors and your managers on how to enforce all of this and train your employees what's expected of them. But at the end of the day, if they're in a bathroom and nobody else is in there, whether they wash their hands or not is between them and, the gods of disinfectant. You can't is the real answer. But you can in any visible place. So if someone's walking through the hallways with no mask, that person is told you either wear a mask or you go home. And you can do that, by the way. You can send someone home if you know they're not following your protocols. Sorry, you can't work on them. Like the guy in Costco yesterday. I don't know if you saw that on social media. A guy wouldn't wear a mask in Costco, and the manager very politely, as he was being filmed by the guy, said, "Hi world, this man can't shop here. He's not wearing a mask," and they told him to leave. You can do the same thing. So there's no God-given right to be in an office without a mask.
So Jane, I'm just wondering, there are a lot of buildings that have shared common spaces like lobbies,
Yep.
restrooms is the big one.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you as an employer, you don't really control the building. How
Right.
are you going to keep your employees safe when there's, common areas, hallways to walk through to get to your particular office on X floor, elevators,
Right.
that you have to press buttons on to get to your floor?
So I think anyone who is coming into the office is probably wearing gloves or has some means of pushing buttons and doing things like that doesn't involve touching, or if they do touch, that they wash up afterward. But in terms of being in the elevator, we would say to them, regardless of what the building does or doesn't require, if there are 3 people in that elevator, wait. And if you're 5 minutes late, that's okay. That's okay. In terms of the restrooms, you supply them with enough wipes that they can disinfect before and after. It's the best you can do with a common area that you don't control. I would also talk to my landlord, though, about, again, ostentatiously cleaning. I think that's really important. And most of them are doing it, by the way. They don't want to be sued any more than anyone else does. So you want to make sure that people are visibly cleaning and that people, know how to keep themselves safe. That's pretty important.
Hey,
Right.
Jane, going back to Kirsten's question, I have a question, kind of a follow-up in that, all right, so you've got someone that's not wearing a mask and we're going to play the whole police and I don't know what we're going to do, right? Are we going to say you got one warning and then you've got to leave? It is what it is. But how
Right.
about, some of the other things too? I mean, how diligent do we need to be in really forcing people to do it or asking them to leave, as opposed to saying, hey, here's the best practice and we trust that you're going to do what you should do?
If it's something that's important, like a mask, I'd be pretty strict about it personally, because you need to be able to defend the fact that you have done everything you can with anything that's important to keep people safe, and you've tried your best. In terms of something like my pen example, if someone handed someone else a pen, I'm not sending them home. Probably is not particularly rational, but if it's not a hugely important thing, I would let it go with a warning. But I think you really have to take a hard line. Chris?
I'm just wondering, we were just thinking of like really obvious signs everywhere. I mean, we've just remodeled.
Yes.
Beautiful sleek office, and now we're gonna have all these hokey signs. But has anybody heard of like a package
Yes.
of signs that are available?
And they're free at CDC.
Okay.
Yeah, they have all kinds of signs. I'm going to send around a list of resources after this, but CDC has pre-printed signs. You can just print them out and post them everywhere. And I suggest you do it.
Okay. Jane? Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Louis.
I
Go
was just
for
going
it.
to mention one thing that I was speaking with some of my clients that are, in case some of you may not know, landlords. And I asked them what they're planning on doing. Lots of them are planning on having gloves, even having masks available. But one of the things that came up, which you all should be very careful, and if there's a complaint necessary, make it. A lot of people are not going to wait for elevators, and they're going to now take stairs.
Yes.
And where stairs have not been used and lights might be out and stairs do not have all the proper protection, it is important that if an employee takes and uses the stairs, that they let you know if there's any part of it that is not fully up to code or is not operative, because that needs to be adjusted or maintained right away. So, a lot of those stairs, nobody ever goes in but now they may be used more regularly. So let your landlords know. And as I mentioned, my clients are already aware and they're being proactive, and many of them are looking up their stairs, and make sure the lighting is all adequate.
Yes.
Lou, can you imagine the handrails on the stairs?
Ugh.
It's like my favorite cruise ships. I mean that seriously. I love cruise ships. Jane, the one
Gloves are a
question,
good idea coming in.
Gloves.
the one question that I imagine will be one of the ones I am most frequently asked is, I don't want to go back to the office.
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
Yes.
As you start thinking about. And I don't know that there's such an easy answer to that, because every
It's
employer
not.
is going to have their own, as we've talked about, their own answer. And then there are disability questions if you have some sort of anxiety disorder. Here in New York, basically everybody does, or some sort or another, or something else where you kind of tie it to a disability, which makes it easier for me to impress that on an employer. But even when you were chatting before, talking about the mask in the hallway, can you imagine the employee who walks past the person without a mask, who coughs right in their face? You send that person home. You're doing the right thing, right? You say, no, this is our policy. You haven't observed it. You must leave. The employee who has done it then says, I'm afraid to come to work. I want to work from home. And I really do see a vicious cycle about that. I think that's going to be one of the toughest questions of all. And I don't have an easy answer for a client. I don't know that you do. It's we don't know for sure how we deal with that yet.
We don't, except that I'll tell you, and we're going to talk in a minute about risks for litigation. You better have a legitimate business reason for saying yes or no and treating different employees differently, because that's going to be a huge area.
I agree with you 100%. I just see this as kind of fertile ground.
I absolutely agree with you. I think accommodating people without what are traditionally thought of as disabilities, you know, the people with childcare issues, the people with elderly parents, the people with sick kids, you know, just not COVID sick, but just kids are afraid to let go outside. That's going to be, when you get into those squishy subjective decisions, again, that's when you and I get busy. So
yeah, and it's a hard one, and there's no real easy answer.
I agree.
Yeah,
Jane,
All right.
it's Arnie. What is the obligation of the employer in the office, like the firm in the office, with the landlord in the building and things that you see, or if they don't have, you know, sanitizer when you walk in, or a supply of masks or gloves? Is there any obligation, A, on the tenants for the landlord's malfeasance or failure to adopt standards? And then, I mean, separately, are these standards locally generated? You say, like, you're going to have a written plan. I assume that's New York. I mean,
Yes.
are things going to be mandated jurisdiction by jurisdiction?
Yes.
And then how do we as an employer relate to the, you know, the building, which
Right.
is Lou's
Right.
group?
So you know, frankly, if your landlord doesn't have the equipment you need, your landlord's an idiot, because they are so vulnerable to any kind of a lawsuit that, I mean, whatever that bottle of sanitizer costs them, you know, I can't imagine that they're really not going to think this through. And I've had landlords come to me. I consulted with Lou. I had a client who owned the building, and they sublet, you know, or they rent half the building and they use half the building, and they wanted me to come up with a policy. And I'm like, I'm a labor lawyer. But, you know, people are taking this seriously and they don't want to be sued. And if you see a deficiency, I would suggest what Lou just said, which is let them know. There's no sanitizer downstairs. There's no wipes downstairs. You're letting 15 people back in the elevator. That can't continue.
But if you don't see a deficiency, but there are deficiencies that generate an issue, are you as the tenant responsible at all for the landlord's now, you know, action?
I think you could be responsible as an employer of people who are being forced to go through an unsafe area. You are required under OSHA to provide a safe workplace. And if the building you're in is truly unsafe, I think you have a potentially big problem. So, you know, I would listen, our landlord is sending me, I can't tell you how many emails about all the great things they're doing in the building. You know, but if you're not getting that from your landlord, I'd write them a letter. How are you keeping the lobby safe? How are you keeping the elevator safe? How are you keeping the bathroom safe? And put them on the spot, but at least you can show you tried. Then you
But
know
in other words, if you do, it's sort of like, how far do we as employers have to go?
far. Seriously, far.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Or how
Right.
about if you're in space that doesn't have a formal reception area or lobby? There's different entrances and people come in and out and go to their offices. I guess that's a local issue.
Yeah, I mean, are you talking about like a WeWork kind of place or shared?
No, regular office building, but it's all secure, but
Right.
there's no like reception area.
Right. You know, if they're smart, again, they've got a Purell pump as you walk in the door. They are, again, ostentatiously cleaning, and you should check with them and say, all right, what are you doing? So I can tell my employees and they'll feel better. I would grill them. If you're not hearing from them affirmatively, ask them. Ask them.
Thank you.
Jane, can I just respond to Arnie? Just for
Sure,
a moment?
please.
Just really jump in.
Yeah.
Arnie, more often than not, you'll find that your commercial lease is probably pro-landlord. There are just so many provisions that are protecting. And like during the current situation, pre-coronavirus, you know, what you do in your space and how you act in your space and what you allow to happen in your space is supposed to be the responsibility of the tenant. But I do think that if you have a landlord that's not appreciating the severity of all this, I mean, I can tell you I have long lists of recommendations for clients, even though I say this provision may protect you. I think the short answer is I would say as the employer, you should be prepared to do what as much as you can, because you're not going to be able to push this off on the landlord.
And Lou, what about the old-fashioned warranty of habitability that we all learned about in law school and I haven't talked about since?
You know what? I will just say that when this first occurred, I had an onslaught of force majeure requests about, can I get out of my obligation? I can't. And if you look at your leases, very often, I'm not skirting that issue, but truth be told, the force majeure really did not apply to the issue of payment of rent. I know it's not what you asked, but it is, the warranty of habitability is that there is a space that's being provided. Once you are occupying that space, you really don't have a claim. In other words, the idea is that if you cannot occupy the space because something the landlord did expressly, then you would be absolved of a rent obligation. But quiet enjoyment, again, it's the landlord's providing you space. It's not the landlord's obligation to go around and try to safeguard. I think the common areas.
That's what I was getting at, exactly.
The common areas belong to the landlord. And so
But isn't that what,
I think it's going to be an issue with the access. I think the access is really going to be problematic. And that's why, if you heard, I jumped into the stairs because most was saying I have to figure out that they're going to be using stairs, and I've got to make sure that they're beyond safe. They're beyond safe.
And Lou, let me add, and I'm sure you've written provisions that are helpful in this context, but what about outside of New York City, lots of people drive to work. And often you bring your car in and you park at the garage. Our experience, the garage is full, so the attendants in the garage are moving the cars around and stuff like that. I mean, there are potential issues here in terms of care that the landlord, and that may be a sublet up to a outside vendor to run the garage, and sort of how you trace both your responsibility and then also how you protect yourself. I don't know, in terms of watching these guys, if they move the car, do they wear gloves, masks, at all times? I mean, you're not even going to know.
But, in a way, it'd be almost like someone who gets sick on the subway on the way to work. I choose how I'm getting there, and I take whatever risk is associated with it. I'd be less worried about the parking lot than I would be about once you're in the building. But, that's a gut reaction.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think, once again, Arnie, the primary responsibility is going to be on the tenant. The tenant is the garage tenant, and his responsibility is going to be about putting the mask and wiping down wiping things down. I can't see that the landlord who owns the building, in an area of space that he lets, which is the garage space, that employee becomes any part of the landlord's responsibility. But we'll see.
So I've got 2 or 3 other areas to cover. Let me just get through that. I'm happy to stay on as long as you want afterward with any questions.
And I do have a question that would involve Lou, though, as well.
Oh, please do. Go ahead.
Okay, well, my staff is a little bit up in arms, Luke, and I'm addressing this to you because we have we can't open our windows, and we have a forced air system that goes from one office to the next. And they say we could take as many precautions as we can in in our own space, and I'm very strict about it. What about the guys next door who are actually doing closings and have been doing closings for the last 6 weeks? All these people right next door, the air is going to come into our space. I went to the landlord said, this is the way the building is. You have your lease. We're doing the best that we can. That's it.
Great question, really, because it is, everybody's space is their own, but it's the air circulation is.
What about
My
an air
staff-
purifier?
Yeah, I can jump in. So we have clients that have been dealing with this, engineers, and basically what they're saying is at the very least you should be insisting that your landlords upgrade to MERV. I think it's MERV 15 filters.
Oh, could you
The
spell
problem
that?
with that, though, it's not necessarily an easy solution, because the better the filter is, the harder it is to get the air through it. So it increases electricity demand, and some of that old equipment just may not have the capability, but at the very least, you should at least ask for that.
MERVE?
MERV, which is the rating, it talks, that's the lingo that they use, the size of the particulate that it's able to extract from the air that's coming through it.
Thank you.
Ron, I don't know if there's anything to this at all, but as you know, I have a daughter who's a paramedic, and one of the things I've done is I've put an air purifier in the room she shares with her sister. It's probably just making me feel better, but it's something. And if you get one of those for each of your employees' offices, it may make them feel better.
Ron, why don't we offline just talk about this issue?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Another reason why you should have taken that space, huh?
You know what I'll add? I mean, if you go offline and do some stuff, you might want to add a blog to the website that will sort of inform this issue. Ron, I think the raising of the air issue is a fabulous question.
Yeah.
And it's one that just, like you say, dwarfs almost everything else. And I'll add separately on Lou's point about force majeure. Alyssa's already done a comment on Delaware and other state force majeure provisions affecting this, and it's on the website as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so 2 more areas I want to cover quickly. One is what happens if someone in your workspace does get sick? What do you do? Aside from sending them home. You can ask the employee who is sick to identify anyone they've come into contact with in the office in the last 14 days. You can alert those people that someone that they've come in contact with has tested positive, is sick. You should send, this is not required, but you should send them for a test on your dime if their insurance won't cover it. And the thing on all of this is try to be as discreet and as confidential as possible, but get the word out, and then clean and sanitize the hell out of the office. That's my best suggestion to all of you. So before people come back, you need to train the employees on what your expectations and your rules are. You need to train your supervisors to enforce them. I got a suggestion that I thought was a good one, that employees should sign for a copy of those rules so that you can show that you told them about it. But despite all of that, despite your best intentions, there's going to be litigation coming out of this, and I think in 3 main areas. The first is wage and hour claims, and a lot of those have to do with working from home, hourly employees who work from home. These are very appealing claims to plaintiffs' lawyers because you're talking about 2, 3, sometimes 4 times the amount in actual underpayment. As a remedy, they are often class and collective actions. So with your hourly employees who are working from home, how are you keeping track of their hours? Are you telling them and making sure they're taking a lunch hour? Are they signing that these are the hours that I actually worked? And by the way, if it's 9 to 5 with an hour for lunch every day, no one's going to buy that. I've had a judge be very impressed because there was actually variation in starting times and stopping times. You need to require them to keep track of their hours in writing. Are you calling them or emailing them on the weekends or after hours because it happens to be when you think of it? Don't do that. You're not paying them for the time. If people have been laid off, let's say you have a manager who's laid off and you don't know how to do something, so you email them. Well, any week in which a manager performs any work whatsoever, you have to pay them for that week. Are you doing that? So you have to be very careful about that sort of thing. And again, make sure you're paying for temperature and question time coming into the office. So I think wage and hour claims are going to be a big one. And I think it's very hard to keep track of what hours people are working and paid for when they're working from home. So you need to come up with some system for that. Second area is discrimination. It's what Chuck and I have been talking about. Who's allowed to telework and who is required to come to the office, who is accommodated, who is not accommodated, and in what ways. Who's brought back first from layoff and who's brought back second or third. You need to look for patterns among protected classes. You need to be very careful that you have a legitimate business reason for making the decisions you're making, something that you can explain and some means of showing that you thought about it at the time and didn't just make these decisions thoughtlessly. You can't bar people from coming back because you think that they shouldn't come back. So if you have someone with asthma or diabetes, apparently is a huge risk factor in this illness, you can't say to someone, I don't want you back in the office, you have diabetes. You can go, or someone old, you can go to people who you know have a disability and say, do you need an accommodation? And if they say no, the conversation's over. And again, accommodate everyone you can, but be aware of who you're not accommodating and whether or not you've got a problem with that. And then the last issue that you have to be, or the last two issues, safety claims. As I said before, OSHA requires you to have a safe workplace. And OSHA, by the way, is of no help to you here. They're not issuing guidelines. They are not issuing anything about what is a safe place to work. And in fact, the AFL-CIO has sued OSHA to try to compel them to do that. Workers' comp may save you with an employee, but it may not. Even workers' comp doesn't apply to deliberate acts. So if you are just thoughtless about all this and not taking any precautions, it's a question whether or not it's covered. They're going to be looking to the employer to take reasonable care to make sure that the workplace was safe. So you want to be able to show, I spent $1,000 on barriers. I went out and made sure we had tons of PPE. We established all these lovely policies. Everyone signed for them. That's what you're going to want to have and show. You have to show that you tried. And again, it's not going to be perfect. People aren't perfect. I left my apartment the other day for the laundry room, forgot my mask. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And then the last thing that you have to be careful about, and it's always the case, that even when people have very modestly persuasive underlying claims, there's always a possibility of retaliation. Someone who is just being a pain in your neck and you're less willing to accommodate what they want because they're just being a pain in the neck, they're going to claim that, you wouldn't give me an accommodation because I complained about fill in the blank. The retaliation claim is often far stronger than the underlying complaint. So Chuck is nodding yes. That's the cover up is always worse than the crime. Nixon had just copped to Watergate. We probably would have somebody else in the White House, but all of history would have been changed. So always be very careful about retaliation claims. And bottom line is you have to show that you tried hard. And some of this is about appearances, but some of it is very real. So you may not always succeed, but do your best. And if anyone has any questions that we haven't covered, like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Jane, I just want to say that was wonderful. Thank you for
Yes.
Oh, my pleasure.
Very
all of us. What a great
Thank
job. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much ground you covered in so little time, just mind-boggling.
I talk fast. Yeah, Kirsten.
So we got the idea through our immigration INBLF call of we're just not coming back almost anybody, only 4 or 5 people, skeletal for indefinitely until.
Yes.
Yeah, and that does make a lot of this a little bit easier. Still need the guidelines, but when you outline all of the risks and we've been operating just fine, it seems crazy to try to take these risks when you don't absolutely have to.
I agree. There are some people who can't really work outside of the office. I mean, we can't keep all of our clerical employees fully employed without someone coming in. And given a choice between laying them off or taking these extraordinary precautions, I mean, the work has to get done. So we would do that. And I think people are very excited about coming back to work just because they're going crazy in New York City sized apartments. But I do think that, like I said, the thrill is going to wear off in a hurry. So do the best you can. Figure out the best you can. It's not going to be easy. It really isn't.
Is there any advice with respect to dealing with your landlord if you're not coming into the office?
Well, we just found out that we had to pay for cleaning because we hadn't affirmatively told them to stop. Now, no one's been in the office for two months.
Right. What are they cleaning?
Yeah, exactly. But, so that's one thing that you might want to do. Anything that happens, make sure you've cut off anything that isn't happening on a regular basis. So that would be one thing. And then I would defer to Lou.
Lou?
Lou, you're muted.
Yeah, I got it. On the cleaning issue, I think the alternative to that, Jane, is that even though there's New York City, there's dust and there's all sorts of dirt that accumulates, most of the cleaning is really relegated to removing the garbage from the garbage cans.
Absolutely. That's why I was so annoyed. It's like, what garbage are you emptying?
Yeah, but I will tell you, the flip side of that is where there's a fixed cost for cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
And now that the law will require that there be more extensive cleaning, you may get a bargain on the cleaning end because now you're going to be getting better. You're supposed to get coronavirus
level cleaning,
standard cleaning. So,
well, we brought in an outside company to do the cleaning and paid a building guy to stand there and supervise.
I think the landlords are going to, it goes to the list. I can just tell you from personal experience, it's one of the things that my clients are, I don't want to say begrudgingly, but they've added to the list that the obligations for cleaning, it's a great business to go into right now, is really something that they're assuming because the risk of not cleaning or not doing the right job is just too much. So common areas, again, are going to be dealt with landlords taking that responsibility. It'll be interesting to see if there's some way that they can share the cost with the tenant, but the way I see it, for the most part, the answer is that's what you call rent. So
yeah. Anything else?
Jane, I had one thing. I realized the focus is on the office, but what about a situation where you have to attend a hearing or a deposition outside the office and bringing people along as part of the requirement of the work? Does that, and there's a reluctance on one employee's part to participate.
Are you having in-person things like that? Because up here, I've had a Zoom mediation, a Zoom arbitration. I had a telephone conference with a judge who always made us come in. Nobody wants to leave their living room.
Right now, that's the case.
Right.
Come And I'm in the middle of an arbitration where the judge, I had to sort of force the issue and say, I'm not coming,
Right,
period.
right.
And that's worked out fine now, but I'm thinking months down the line, the situation is not necessarily going to be any better. And some people may say, all right, we're open for business.
Right.
And people may be still reluctant to go. I would be reluctant to go, and the question is whether you need a team of people at a particular place.
Well, I would be not only reluctant to go, but I'd be reluctant to go anywhere where there are going to be a room full of people. I mean, I'm thinking our conference room has really bad air circulation. It always gets very hot in there after about an hour with a full room. I'm thinking that's the last place I'm going to be. I expect to be, we've upgraded our Zoom to the highest one so that we can have breakout rooms and all kinds of other things, because we're just not doing it. What you're talking about, Arnie, I mean, it's the same accommodation issue. Can you, if you accommodate employee A, understand you're probably going to accommodate employee B, but there are ways to accommodate. You can have them on a speakerphone, you can have them, on someone's laptop. There are ways to do it if you're willing to do it, but what you do for one, you're going to have to do for the other. All right, so we've been taping this. If anyone wants to hear it twice, I can't imagine. But I am going to put together a list of resources within the next few days to be posted, the CDC posters, but tons of other. There's too much information on this. It's overwhelming. And so I'm just going to include some things that I think are helpful. But again, this is a total rabbit hole in terms of trying to cover everything.